Hey everybody, Tyler with Meeple Mountain here, bringing you another exciting board game review. This time it's from our partners at Peterson Games, who have a really exciting campaign coming up on GameFound, where they're bringing 4 unique and exciting titles to the same campaign for you to back, pick, choose, take them all, whatever you want to do. Each of them are incredibly different and unique, but I have been really fortunate to get my hands on a copy of Invasion of the Brood, which is a 2-player game designed by Sandy Peterson. Now, if you've watched my content, you know that I'm a huge Peterson game fan, from Cthulhu Wars, Glorantha, just all of their content, even their new title that they have, which was Cthulhu Wars Duels. And so I have really been impressed with the 2-player content that Peterson Games has put out, and Invasion of the Brood is kind of just continues in that vein of quality 2-player content. So the setting of this game is the Brood, the aliens, are living on the moon and doing Brood things, trying to take over the world, planting workers in all the factories around the world, and it's up to the consortium of countries on Earth to work together to get Orion rockets down to the south, to the Antarctic, where they can launch these rocket parts into space to build a super weapon to attack and defeat the Brood. And so each player has a very asymmetric role in this game, where they are working to, as humans, awaken and activate kind of these main countries of the world and get their armies in gear, alert them to this threat, and get rockets moving down south, where the Brood is doing mind control and trying to kind of surgically strike and drop in workers around the planet to try and take over enough factories to win. It's a really exciting game, a really great experience with really tight decision making across the board. So I'm super excited to show this to you. So let's go ahead and jump in and learn how to play Invasion of the Brood. Invasion of the Brood is a 2-player pseudo-area control game where one player takes on the role of the human, attempting to awaken the countries across the globe and move these Orion rocket tokens from wherever they are constructed down to the Antarctic or the Mountains of Madness to be launched into space. The human player will win when they fill up their player board with 6 of these Orion tokens. It's important to note that there are just a few more than 6 that you'll need, so you've got a few in spare, but you won't have a lot of extras once you start launching your rockets to confuse the enemy, so it'll get more and more difficult to successfully get your rockets down as the game progresses. The Brood, on the other hand, are this insidious, mind-controlling alien race that are set to kind of drop larvae across the planet. Every turn they'll get to drop one for free somewhere on the board, and they'll be able to use what they call mind power, or their currency, similar to power in Cthulhu Wars if you're familiar with it, to evolve their larvae into potentially broodmaster adults that will grant them additional currency and power as they go, or perhaps even workers who can take over and shut down factories. Remember, if workers are in one factory for each of the 6 major powers in the game, the Brood will win. They can also molt their workers into incredibly powerful warriors that can protect their workers or even go on the offensive and take out human forces across the board. All this is powerful enough, but the most insidious power that the Brood have is their ability to use these mind control tokens. They can actually mind control human units wherever they are across the board and turn them against their fellow humans. They can cause them to go berserk and attack every unit in their region, and they can use them to intercept transport of Orion rockets, or even steal air support units from the humans and use those against them as well. Now, we've talked a little bit about human units. We'll talk about them more in detail in a moment, but there are, again, 6 major powers in the game, and then there are some neutral countries here in the south. We'll see those. They're in South America. We've got some in Africa and Australia, and even up here in Canada. They fell into the neutral region. Sorry, guys. So all of these neutral units also have their own types of military that can be built. Factories across the board will need to be woken up as different countries are made aware of the threat of the aliens that spread across the board. And as these dormant or neutral tokens are removed from the board, you'll be able to build additional units that are contingent upon the country of origin onto those locations. Now, this game, you might say, well, Tyler, where are all your units? This is actually the setup start of the game if I'm playing as America. as a human player, you can actually take on the role of any of the 6 major powers. I could choose to be Europe, which would actually have me start with my country of Europe awake, with my European units out on the board, but America would actually be really sleepy and have 2 dormant tokens on them that we would have to use turns to awaken them. And so actually playing as America is pretty dull at the start. Everything just has 1 dormant token. All of the neutral countries are neutral until you, as America loves to do, move army units into their region and take them over so that you can start using their factories. And so all of this, of course, again, is with the objective of moving Orion rockets down. But each of the human units have military units that are on the ground, fleets for the oceans, and air support units. We'll talk more about those in detail in just a second, but I wanted to kind of give you the overarching look at the map and kind of the layout of what the overall goal of the game. Again, the Brood wins if they have workers in a factory for each of the 6 major powers, and the humans win if they're able to launch 6 of their Orion rockets down in the Antarctic. Let's go ahead and dive a little bit more and get a closer look at the army factions for the humans and how a human turn goes, and then talk a little bit about a Brood turn, and then we'll talk about our favorite thing in games, of course, which is dice rolling in combat. First, let's talk a little bit about our human player and the turns that they will take. Now, again, as I mentioned, you have 6 of these cards in the game of Invasion of the Brood, in which you can take on the role of any of the 6 main powers in the game, which are America, the European Union, Russia, China, Japan, and India. And you can take on those roles. You could do that randomly if you wanted to, or you can just choose one. For this illustration, I chose America just because it is the most kind of neutral start without you having any units on the board, just to kind of showcase how that works. So a human turn is laid out in several very clear steps. The first thing you'll do is try to awaken a country. Now, there are several options that you have, really, for how to awaken a country. You can choose to use mediation and try to talk to them and kind of share the threat of the Brood and try to get them to awaken. Now, the way that mediation works is, of course, just like mediation, it takes a lot of time to do. And so the way that you'll mediate is you'll remove a dormant token from a nation, and you'll have to choose the nation that you want to mediate with. And when you mediate, they will remove their dormant token, they will awaken, and they will start placing their units out onto the board, which is all a good thing. You'll get their armies out, you can start to defend against the Brood, their factories are up and running to make Orion rockets or units, whatever it is that you need, but it takes you time. And so the way that that works is you're going to look at your relation in conjunction with any of the other countries. Let's say that I, as America, wanted to mediate with India. Well, our relationship, diplomacy as it's called in the game, is at a 2. And what that means is I have to use these little block tokens, and I need to block 2 of my additional actions that I can take this turn. The rest of the actions I can take is Project Orion, in which I will build Orion rockets, move them, and try to launch them if I am able. Then there is the traditional moving, where I can move my units around the board and try to set up to defend my factories, my Orion rockets, and just get in a position to wall up the Brood and get them off my planet. Then there's battle, in which you'll literally roll the dice for units that are in your sectors of the board and see if you're able to defeat them. We'll talk a little bit more about how battle works in Invasion of the Brood in just a second. And then build, in which you'll, at each factory that is not occupied by a worker, that is not covered by a dormant or neutral token, you will be able to build a unit. In this case, you could build any units that you have lost in the game through combat or other means. And so I would, if I mediated with India, I would need to cover 2 of my additional sections. So let's say I chose to cover build and battle. So this turn, I could only then do my Project Orion and move action. And so you've got to be careful, as this will really slow your turns down. If I tried to mediate with Russia or China, that's 3 actions that I'm losing, which is incredibly powerful. I could always, of course, mediate with myself, and I would just wake myself up, and then I'm back in the game, which is great. The other option that you can do to awaken a country is war. Say you do not want to mediate, it takes too much time, it's too costly. You can choose to declare war on them, and that gets their armies going real quick too. So America could instead choose to declare war on Russia. And that's great, except then, instead of blocking some actions, the Brood player actually gets dupe tokens. That's these little guys here. these dupe tokens, they'll get dupe tokens equal to the diplomacy, so in this case 3, would go to the brood player. And now these dupe tokens effectively are free mind power that they can spend on any future turn in the game. And so that's really dangerous because you can let them set up to take some incredibly powerful turns later on where they have lots of actions. And again, that'll make a little more sense once we talk about their turn in just a moment. So that is awakening. That's the first thing you'll do. You do that. You can try to awaken one country per turn. Now, once all the countries are awakened, the 6 major powers, or if you choose to, which I don't know why you would, but you could, you can choose to go neutral. You can take neutrality. So once you've awakened all the places, neutrality effectively gives the brood player 1 free mind power. It's just a way to ramp the game up. So they get a little bit of a bonus once all the countries are awakened, but it's definitely worth it to awaken all the countries. Next, again, is Project Orion. As I mentioned, you will try to build these Orion rockets at the various factories around the board that are available. You'll then move them south towards the Antarctic and try to launch them and get them on your board. Again, you win when you have 6 of them. Next is movement. We talked a little bit about that. And then battle. Again, battling is really, really fun in this game. So hopefully you guys can see a few examples here of some units that we have through various countries. Every country has a different amount of units, but let's just use America as an example. They have some really hard-hitting units in their repertoire. And so every country has a different quantity of them, but they're broken down effectively into 3 units. There's armies, fleets, and air units. Now, armies, again, always have a movement of 1, and they're land-bound. Then we have fleets that live in the waters, and air support units that actually live on your available slot here in your player board. And you'll use them for airstrikes or air interceptions, air supports, all kinds of different things throughout the game as you want to. Now, each unit has their nationality, a little bit of kind of a flavor image, and then they have 3 numbers. Those numbers are their offense number, their defense number, and their movement number. Now, you'll notice all the air units have an infinity symbol on them, which means their movement is irrelevant. They stay on your board, and then you'll just move them to your expended section once you've actually sent them out to do something on your turn. So they can't be used multiple times, but these can be really powerful things. So the way that combat works is you're going to compare your offense number, and you're going to roll a dice. If your dice value is equal to or less than the number rolled, so in this case 4 or less if I was rolling for this fleet, you've scored a hit against your opponent. Your opponent then looks at their defense and would roll a dice. If they roll equal to or less than their defense, they shrug off the hit. If they miss their defense roll, then they would take damage and be destroyed. The thing that you can do with air units, what makes air units so powerful is you'll notice they have a plus symbol. So like this Indian air unit here has a +2, where this American one has a +4. That is actually an increase to your attack number entirely. You don't roll for air units, it's just a flat addition. So if I was attacking with this fleet but added an air unit, I have now an 8 attack. And you might say, Tyler, that's more than a 6. It's an auto hit. You're right, it is an auto hit, which is exciting. Also, on top of that, if you have more than 6, you actually reduce your opponent's defense by that many numbers as well. So if for this instance it was an 8, the opponent's defense is reduced by 2 on top of the automatic hit. So they're not looking well. You're probably going to kill whatever you attack with your Ford Carrier and your Raptor. Again, air units can only be used in attacks once per full turn, so you've got to be really choosy about when to use them, but they can be very, very powerful. And you might say, boy, I don't even know how the Brood could stand against this. Well, the kicker is, remember, they get to use a lot of their mind power to mind control your units. And so those really cool Raptor planes that you have can be taken from you the moment that they're built and brought over to the Brood player, who can use them exactly the same way that you can. Now, there's a few fun little interactions in movement, which can be fleet interceptions, where if there's an enemy fleet in the same area is one of your fleets, a mind-controlled fleet, they can choose to try and stop your movement or your transport of a unit, or an Orion rocket by doing fleet interception combat, which is like an interrupt action. Similar with airplanes, you can do the same thing with your air units, where I could be trying to air support myself. The Brood player could play a mind-controlled air unit and try to intercept my plane, and then they would actually do a combat roll to see if they cancel each other out or destroy one another. And so there's some fun interplay there in battle, but the battle is very calculated. There's a little bit of luck, but it's definitely revolving heavily around how you utilize your air units to cancel out and make those big plays for when they count. So that's a little bit about the human player. Let's talk now about the Brood player and how their actions go. Now, you just saw the overwhelming military power that the Earth can bring to bear against the Brood. So how are the Brood going to counter that? Well, they're not going to run quantity, they're going to run quality. The Brood are incredibly sneaky and oh so fun to play in Invasion of the Brood. I mean, their name is in the title. We know they're going to win, right? They're the real heroes of the game, right? The Brood play a very different game than the humans, where the humans are doing this large-scale area control and kind of logistics game where they're trying to convoy their Orion rockets down south through these very weak neutral nations, trying to get their very powerful main country nation units down there to defend. The Brood are just kind of playing a buffet style game where they're just picking and choosing their battles, attempting to snipe Orion rockets where they can, all so that they can get their workers set up in these positions of power in the factories across the country so that they can win. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Brood turn and kind of what they do. The Brood player functions kind of similar to units in Cthulhu Wars titles. If you're familiar with those, you'll gain power every turn, and you'll pretty much use power to do everything that you want to do. So at the start of your turn, you're always going to remind the human that they can refresh their air units that they've used. Then you're going to automatically get 3 mind power. So your starting turns are basically going to be 3 mind power, but you'll get additional mind power for every adult Broodmaster that you have out on the board, and there are 6 of them, so there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to get some additional mind power from these guys, because they're nothing to sneeze at. They're relatively middle of the road. You'll want to protect them, but they provide a lot of options for you in the game, and they give you mind power, which is everything you need in life, is mind power. The next thing that you'll do is you get to basically place a new mind control marker on a human unit for free. So you'll always at least be mind controlling 1 unit per turn. So that really cool Abrams tank that the US just got, it's yours now. Now you have it, and you've ruined their plans. And the nice thing is you can do it anywhere on the board. So no matter how well laid the humans' plans may be, if they've got a lone unit or a unit even with a group of friends, that's even better for you, and you can just mind control it. So everything that they're building is going to get destroyed so quickly by your mind controlled units. It's wonderful. The last thing you'll do is you kind of do these little surgical strikes where you drop pod larvas from the moon anywhere on the board that's open. So what that means is just where there's nothing, where there's no units. This becomes a little bit tricky as the game goes on, but at the start of the game, it's incredible. You can drop these guys anywhere and then take your turn. Basically, on your turn, you'll use your mind power that you've got to do pretty much whatever you want. You want to turn this larva into an adult? You can do that for a mind power. Do you want to get a worker? Because workers are great. Workers are how you stop factories from building and start getting towards your victory condition. You could turn that worker into an incredible warrior, which again, if you look at these warriors, they're so awesome. They have a 6 offense. They're just always going to hit. And then if you have some mind-controlled air units that you've stole from the human player, you can use those to beef these guys up. They're wonderful. Your warriors can just shred human units. But all of that is, you can really start to play the game how you want. You can mind control additional units. You can cause those mind control units to go berserk. Berserk is basically an empowered battle action where it will attack everything in its region. So if there's 6 units, human units, and you mind control one of them, you're hitting 5 units for the price of 1. It's a really nice way to do, because you don't care about those mind controlled units. They're not your friends. They're just bad people that you're controlling. So you can just wipe out clusters of units. So the human player has to really weigh these costs of, like, do I want to cluster units up? Do I need to split them up? There's a lot of challenges there. And again, the last thing you can do, of course, for free is you can just destroy Orion rockets. If there's ever an Orion rocket by itself and you have a unit there, you can just knock it out. There's also a priority of targeting for your units that's really helpful. Humans can't just come in and destroy your workers on factories. They're actually protected by your larvas, by human-controlled units, by warriors. And so you can start to make really tactical choices about how you protect and insulate your workers once they get nested into these factories. And you can be like a tick. If you've kind of noticed the tick symbology on some of these cards, you're like a tick. You're very hard to root out once you get settled in. And that's really fun, like setting up positions of power across the board tactically and just undoing all of the hard work that the human player is trying to do. As playing as both sides, the human player feels like they're always on the back foot, like trying to catch up, trying to get ahead. Where the Brood, even if you're losing, it's really fun to be the Brood because you can just move around the board and just have such a fun time messing with with the human because they don't have a counter for a lot of the stuff that you do. So that is the Brood players' turns. Let's kind of zoom out and then talk about some final thoughts on how the game functions and just how it works overall. And that is Invasion of the Brood in a nutshell. I hope you enjoy getting kind of a quick glimpse at the two very different ways that you'll play this game as a human player or as a Brood player, and I hope it got you excited to check this out and the 3 other awesome, entirely unique games that Peterson is bringing to the table on GameFound on March 9th. This is all really, really exciting stuff. I super enjoy 2-player games. If you've watched my other reviews, I've said it, but I like to hear my voice, so I'll say it again. I really appreciate 2-player games in the sense that every interaction in the game has to be very, very balanced. With larger player games, you can kind of trust the table to balance out the rough edges of interactions and make sure things aren't too take that or mean. But with a 2-player game, you're always picking on the same person. So those interactions have to be balanced. They have to be amicable, and they have to feel challenging. You have to give each player choices and make those choices equally appealing and give you something to mull over in your head as you work towards this victory, because a 2-player game is really more of like a dance, a waltz between players, where a large player count game oftentimes turns into a battle royale where it's just playing King of the Hill, trying to hold on to whatever lead you've claimed. And so I really like that Peterson Games has moved towards 2-player games, because I think Sandy Peterson has such a great mind for intricate interactions in games. He's shown that on his bigger titles. I love to see him getting into the nuance and the minutia of a 2-player game. And so Invasion of the Brood really knocks it out of the park for me as a 2-player game. It's got this really fun theme and feel to it. You definitely feel like the countries that you play as a human are different. Their units are different. Their strengths and weaknesses are different just geographically. There's something to be said for being India. Your units aren't that great, but you're right there by Africa, and you can start instantly getting a beeline down to Antarctica. Or maybe you want to be Russia or America with stronger, more plentiful units, but maybe a slower start. There's all kinds of pros and cons to the diplomacy and how many actions you may want to lose or how many dupe tokens you want to give to the Brood. And there's some really powerful, palpable decisions that you have to make. Again, as I just mentioned before, the Brood are so fun to play because even if you're behind, you get to just mess with the humans. No matter what the humans do, their best laid plans, you're going to mess them up because of mind control tokens. Any nice, really powerful unit, basically playing as United States is terrible because every time the US builds a unit, it just gets mind controlled. They're so good. Why wouldn't you? And so it's a really fun balancing act of trying to figure out how to mind control the right units and make the big plays, but make sure that you're still doing what you came here to do, not just toy with the humans, but build your workers and tank up in these factories so that you can win the game. Again, as humans, that puts this really weird balancing act because, of course, the workers are most likely trying to set up in the north, the top of the map, where all the factions are, where their victory conditions are. You're trying to build Orion rockets and move them south and launch them, and so you have to balance, like, do I keep my good troops up north to keep the factories safe, or do I move south to make sure the Orion rockets get there safe? And it's just a really fun waltz and dance that happens in this game. So I give it top marks for player interaction, for theme, and for vibe. Aesthetically, it's really minor, but I will say the theme of the map is cool. It's kind of got that old school, like 90s, 80s, 70s, whatever it is, radar kind of feel. The dormant and neutral tokens get a little lost in my eyes, and once the board kind of gets cluttered with units, it was a little bit overwhelming for me visually, but it's such small potatoes for such an awesome game that packs a lot of content with a few cardboard tokens and some really, really awesome rules. I will mention the rulebook is well put together. It, as all Peterson rulebooks that are kind of on the heavier side tend to do, it has examples of turns and battle sequences and everything that you need to know. It's in the book. It's really well done. It's got a lot of content, and I appreciate that it is a thorough rulebook that anticipates the questions that you as a gamer would ask and makes sure to answer them. You're not noticing probably that high-end Peterson games, we don't have 12-inch Brood tokens and things, but all of it is fine because this is a two-player game. It's not about the pieces and the production. It's about the rules and the interactions between players, and that is where Invasion of the Brood just shines. It is a really, really fun game. If you're looking for something that is a sci-fi kind of two-player area control type game, you should definitely think about picking up Invasion of the Brood when it goes on GameFound on March 9th. I can't speak for the other titles, but I can just throw my hat out there and just say every Peterson game that I've played has been really, really solid, and I've really, really enjoyed their content. I'm saying really a lot, but their content is quality, and I think you guys will appreciate all of their titles. So I hope that you get a chance to check out their campaign on GameFound and jump in and back the content that jumps out to you. I was really excited to get a look at Invasion of the Brood. I hope that you enjoy getting a look at Invasion of the Brood and it got you excited to jump in and play this really awesome sci-fi game that Sandy Peterson and his team have put out. Thank you, as always, for coming to Meeple Mountain for your content needs for board games and board game reviews. I hope you'll continue to do so, and as always, happy gaming. Thanks for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Check out some of our other Meeple Mountain content. I promise you won't be disappointed. This is Tyler Williams, signing off.